The moment I saw my brother being shoved into the back of a police car, I knew something was off. Franklin had never been in trouble a day in his life, yet here he was, hands cuffed behind his back, face red with frustration as the self-righteous HOA president, Eleanor Grayson, stood on the curb, arms crossed, watching like she'd just won the lottery. "Eleanor, what the hell is this?" I demanded, storming up to her. She turned, her lips pressing into the kind of smug grin that made my blood boil. "Oh, Felix, it's all very simple. Your brother has been in violation of multiple HOA rules. He refused to pay his fines, and when we attempted to collect, he became aggressive. We had no choice but to involve law enforcement." I glanced at Franklin through the back window of the police cruiser. He was yelling something, but the officers had already started driving off before I could hear him. "You had him arrested for HOA violations?" I asked, incredulous. "Oh, it's more serious than that," she said, tilting her chin up. "He threatened me. That's assault." I stared at her. "That's a lie." She feigned shock. "Are you calling me dishonest?" "I have witnesses." I could already see a few of her HOA lackeys lingering nearby, nodding along. The same people who had been harassing my brother for months. Franklin had moved into this neighborhood last year, excited to finally own his own home, and from day one, Eleanor had made his life hell. First, it was the mailbox being the wrong shade of beige. Then, the grass being half an inch too long. She threw fines at him like confetti at a parade. He'd paid some, fought others, but nothing was ever enough. And now she'd escalated to this. I clenched my jaw, but before I could say more, Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Honestly, Felix, I don't know why you're so upset. We're just maintaining order. If your brother doesn't respect the rules, he doesn't belong here. That did it." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." She chuckled. "Oh? And why is that?" I leaned in, making sure she heard every word. "Because as of last week, I'm the new county mayor." The color drained from her face. I didn't wait for her response. I turned on my heel, pulling out my phone as I walked away. I had calls to make. Franklin wasn't spending a single night in jail, and by the time I was done, Eleanor Grayson would regret ever thinking she could use the law as her personal weapon. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already ringing. It was Sheriff Martinez, a no-nonsense lawman I'd worked with on several county initiatives. I answered immediately, stepping inside my vehicle and shutting the door behind me. "I just got word about your brother," Martinez said without preamble. "He's being processed now, but something about this stinks." "I couldn't agree more," I replied. "Eleanor Grayson is behind this. She's been harassing Franklin for months, and now she's fabricating charges. She claims he threatened her," Martinez said, skepticism evident in his tone. "But the officer on the scene told me there was no real altercation. Just a heated argument." I drummed my fingers against the steering wheel, keeping my anger in check. "That's because she planned this. She's been looking for a way to get rid of him, and now she thinks she's found it." Martinez exhaled. "I can't override the arrest without going through proper channels, but I'll make sure he's treated right while I dig into this. If there's no real evidence, I'll have him out before morning." "That's not enough," I said. "I want every piece of documentation on this. The report, the officer's statements, any so-called witnesses Eleanor is using. And I want to know if this is a pattern with her." "I already have a deputy pulling records," Martinez assured me. "She's had complaints before, but nothing that made it to my desk. I'll send you what I find." I thanked him and ended the call, my mind already racing ahead. Eleanor had gotten away with too much for too long, and now she'd crossed a line she couldn't undo. Pulling up Franklin's security camera feed on my phone, I rewound the footage to just before the arrest. My brother had installed cameras after Eleanor's goons started showing up unannounced, and now I was about to find out exactly what had happened. The video showed Franklin standing on his porch, arms crossed, as Eleanor and two of her HOA lackeys stood in his driveway. She was holding a clipboard, speaking in that condescending tone she always used. Franklin was clearly frustrated but kept his distance. Then Eleanor suddenly gasped, clutching her chest like she'd been struck, despite Franklin not moving an inch. Moments later, the police arrived. I clenched my jaw. She had staged the entire thing. I forwarded the footage to Martinez and added a note: "This should be enough to clear him. Let me know the second you get him out." But I wasn't stopping there. I had bigger plans for Eleanor Grayson. I spent the next hour making calls, gathering everything I needed. By the time I drove back to Franklin's house, I had a plan in motion. Parking in the driveway, I noticed several neighbors peeking through their curtains. Word had spread fast, and I intended to capitalize on that. I walked up to Eleanor's house, knowing she'd be watching. Sure enough, she opened the door before I even knocked, her expression carefully neutral. "Felix," she said smoothly, "what a surprise." I didn't waste time. I just sent security footage of your little performance to the sheriff. Franklin will be out soon. And once he is, we're going to have a very public conversation about your abuse of power. She scoffed, but I saw the flicker of unease behind her eyes. "I don't know what you think you have, but the HOA operates within the law." I stepped closer. "Not anymore. As county mayor, I have the authority to investigate any organization operating under county jurisdiction. And as of this moment, I am launching a full inquiry into your HOA's financial records, complaint history, and legal standing. If I find so much as $1 misallocated, I will personally see to it that you're held accountable." Her composure cracked. "You can't do that." "Oh, I can," I said. "And I will." For the first time since this ordeal began, Eleanor looked genuinely rattled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I didn't wait for her to recover. I turned and walked away, knowing that this was only the beginning. She had played her hand, and now it was my turn. Eleanor's confidence had cracked, but I knew she wasn't the type to back down quietly. She'd spent too many years ruling this neighborhood like her personal kingdom to surrender just because she'd been caught. That meant she would try to cover her tracks, maybe even double down. I needed to move faster than she could. As I left her doorstep, I dialed Martinez again. He picked up immediately, his tone sharper than before. "Just watch the footage," he said without preamble. "Your brother is being released within the hour." I already called the officers who arrested him. They're not happy about being played. That was a good start, but I needed more. I told Martinez to keep digging financial records, past complaints, anything that could expose Eleanor's history of abuses. He agreed, and I ended the call. With Franklin's release secured, I shifted my focus to the HOA itself. Eleanor had been in power for years, which meant she had to be manipulating the system to keep herself there. I had a city clerk run a search on the HOA's legal filings, and within minutes, I had confirmation of what I suspected: there had been no fair elections in over a decade. She had implemented obscure voting rules that ensured only her inner circle had a say. It was the kind of corruption that thrived in the shadows. But I was about to drag it into the daylight. I drove straight to Franklin's house, where the neighborhood was already buzzing. Word of his arrest had spread fast, and residents were gathered in clusters, murmuring among themselves. Some looked concerned, others angry. When I stepped onto Franklin's porch, all eyes turned to me. A man in his 60s, wearing a faded baseball cap, was the first to speak. "Felix, is it true? Eleanor had your brother arrested." I nodded. "And it was a setup. She fabricated the charges to get him out of the neighborhood." A woman near the back scoffed. "That woman has been pulling stunts like this for years. She finds people for nonsense, ignores complaints unless it benefits her, and somehow always makes sure she stays in power." Another neighbor stepped forward. "A few of us tried to challenge her leadership last year. She claimed we missed some mandatory paperwork and threw out our petitions." This was exactly what I needed. Eleanor had spent years silencing opposition, but now the community was ready to speak. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "I'm launching a full investigation into the HOA. If any of you have documentation, emails, letters, fines, anything, bring it to me. We're going to put an end to this." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. People were finally ready to push back. Before I could say more, a sleek black car rolled up to the curb. Eleanor stepped out, flanked by two of her cronies. Her eyes swept over the gathering, and I saw the calculation in her expression. She was assessing how much control she still had. She forced a tight smile. "Felix, I see you're stirring up quite the spectacle. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Franklin is being released. The charges won't stick." Her smile faltered. "Well, that's unfortunate. But the HOA has rules, and if he continues to violate them..." A man from the crowd cut her off. "Oh, give it a rest, Eleanor. We all know you make up half those rules as you go. We've had enough." She stiffened. "Everything I do is within the authority granted to me by the HOA charter." I folded my arms. "Funny you mention that. I looked into that charter. You haven't held a fair election in over 10 years. The crowd erupted into whispers. Eleanor's face darkened. That's a baseless accusation, she said quickly. We follow all legal procedures. I held up my phone. I had the city clerk pull your filings. Every election has been decided by a closed ballot process that conveniently only includes your inner circle. That isn't legal, and it sure as hell isn't democratic. Her mask of control cracked further. You don't have the authority to interfere in HOA matters. I stepped closer. As county mayor, I have the authority to ensure no organization under my jurisdiction is violating legal statutes. And from what I can tell, you've been running this HOA like a dictatorship. One of her cronies, a wiry man with a permanent scowl, tried to interject. This is private property. You can't just threaten us. I turned to the crowd. Who here actually voted for Eleanor in the last election? Silence. Not a single hand went up. I let that hang in the air before addressing Eleanor again. The homeowners have rights and you've been trampling them. That ends today. She was floundering now, trying to regain control. You can't just dissolve the HOA. I smiled. No, but the homeowners can. And with everything I'm uncovering, I doubt you'll have any supporters left by the time I'm done. The crowd murmured in agreement. People were emboldened now, realizing they weren't alone. Eleanor's gaze darted around, but she saw what I saw. Her grip was slipping. Before she could respond, a car pulled up and Franklin stepped out, looking tired but determined. The second he saw Eleanor, his jaw tightened. She opened her mouth, but Franklin cut her off. You had me arrested on fake charges. You're done, Eleanor. The crowd erupted. People were furious now, ready to take action. Eleanor took a step back, then forced a smile. This is far from over. I met her gaze. No, Eleanor. For you it is. She turned sharply and marched back to her car, her cronies scrambling after her. As she drove away, I turned back to the crowd. We're going to hold a real election. We're going to audit the HOA's finances. And if we find anything illegal, Eleanor won't just be losing her position, she'll be facing real charges. The cheer that followed told me everything I needed to know. Eleanor had ruled through fear and manipulation, but that was over. The community was ready to take back their neighborhood, and I was going to make sure they did. Eleanor might have retreated, but I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. That woman thrived on control, and losing it would make her desperate. She had relied on bureaucracy, intimidation, and shady legal loopholes to maintain her grip. And now that we were exposing her, she would scramble to protect herself. I wasn't going to let her. As the crowd around Franklin's house began to disperse, I gathered the neighbors who had spoken up earlier. I needed solid accounts of Eleanor's abuses, and they were more than willing to provide them. We moved inside, Franklin sitting down with a deep exhale while I set my phone to record. An older woman named Denise spoke first. She had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years and had seen Eleanor rise to power. She started small, Denise explained. Little changes to the rules, little favors for certain people who stayed loyal to her. But over time, it became clear that if you weren't in her inner circle, you were a target. A man named Robert, who had been one of the first to challenge Eleanor's leadership, nodded. She fined me over $5,000 in a single year. Every time I tried to fight back, she found another reason to add another fine. She even threatened to put a lien on my house. Franklin, still tense from his ordeal, leaned forward. How did she get away with it for so long? She controlled the records, Robert said. Anytime someone tried to request financial statements or meeting minutes, she either ignored them or claimed they were lost in transition. And when people really pushed, she made their lives miserable. Another man, younger, spoke up. She got my dad's car towed right out of our driveway. Claimed it was abandoned even though he drove it every day. Said it was a violation of aesthetic standards. The stories kept coming and the picture became clearer. Eleanor had built an empire of fear and manipulation, and now that it was crumbling, she would do anything to protect herself. I gathered every testimony, ensuring I had names, dates, and as much detail as possible. I needed hard evidence to take this to the next level. Franklin checked his phone, his eyes narrowing. She just sent out a neighborhood-wide email. I took the phone and read through it. Eleanor had wasted no time launching a counterattack. She claimed that Franklin had been let go on a technicality and that certain individuals were trying to undermine the integrity of the HOA. She framed herself as the victim, warning residents that outside interference was threatening the neighborhood's stability. She's trying to rally support, I said. Robert scoffed. She's scared. She should be, Franklin muttered. I made my decision. We need a homeowners meeting. A real one. Tomorrow night. I'll make sure it's done legally and we'll take control back. Denise looked uncertain. She'll try to stop it. She can try, I said. But she doesn't have the authority she thinks she does. Not anymore. The next morning, I took the evidence we had gathered and met with the county legal team. I wanted to know exactly how much power Eleanor had and, more importantly, how much she had abused. The findings were worse than I anticipated. Eleanor had been misappropriating funds for years. She had charged homeowners for neighborhood improvements that never happened. She had allocated HOA money to pay herself a management fee that was never approved by a proper vote. She had even funneled money into legal fees to fight residents who challenged her authority. I had enough to take her down. By the time evening rolled around, word had spread throughout the neighborhood. The meeting was set to take place in the community clubhouse, and tensions were high. Eleanor had clearly caught wind of what was happening, because when I arrived, she was already there, standing at the front of the room with her usual air of arrogance. Her loyalists sat in the front rows, while the rest of the homeowners filled in behind them. She greeted me with a forced smile. Felix, I wasn't expecting you. I walked past her and addressed the crowd. This meeting is happening because the homeowners have a right to transparency. We're going to discuss the future of this HOA, and more importantly, we're going to talk about the financial mismanagement that's been happening under Eleanor's leadership. Eleanor's smile tightened, but she kept her voice calm. I don't know what you think you've found, but I assure you, everything has been handled legally. I held up a folder. I have financial records that say otherwise. You've been skimming money from the HOA for personal gain. You've been enforcing fines selectively, targeting residents who don't support you. You've denied people access to records they are legally entitled to see. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Eleanor's expression darkened. Those are baseless accusations. I placed the folder on the table. Anyone who wants to see the proof can come take a look. Denise was the first to stand. She walked over, picked up a document, and read it aloud. It was a breakdown of Eleanor's self-appointed management fee, a monthly payout she had been taking from the HOA's funds. This is theft, Denise said, her voice shaking with anger. Robert grabbed another paper. She charged the HOA for landscaping renovations last year. But those never happened. The room erupted. Eleanor's calm facade cracked. She raised her hands. This is all a misunderstanding. These expenses were necessary for the community. I stepped forward. Necessary? Or convenient? Because I also have records of you approving fines against homeowners who tried to challenge you. And I have proof that you've been blocking fair elections for more than a decade. One of her loyalists, a woman with a sharp bob, tried to interject. This isn't how HOA matters are handled. We have procedures. I turned to the crowd. Who here thinks those procedures have been fair? Not a single person spoke in Eleanor's defense. Eleanor's face reddened. You don't have the authority to remove me. I met her gaze. No, but they do. I turned to the crowd. We are voting tonight. A real vote in accordance with the HOA's bylaws. If the majority votes to remove Eleanor from her position, she's out. Panic flickered across Eleanor's face. She had never expected to lose control like this. The vote was taken, and it wasn't even close. Eleanor was officially removed as HOA president. She stood there, frozen, as reality sank in. You can't do this, she whispered. Robert crossed his arms. We just did. The room erupted into cheers. Eleanor turned, her face a mask of fury, and stormed out. As the door slammed behind her, Franklin clapped me on the shoulder. You really did it. I nodded. No, we did it. This neighborhood finally took back what was theirs. And as I looked around the room, seeing the relief and satisfaction on people's faces, I knew Eleanor's reign of terror was well and truly over. Eleanor's departure from the clubhouse had been swift, but her presence still loomed over the room like a storm cloud that had yet to fully dissipate. The energy among the homeowners was electric, a mix of triumph and disbelief. For the first time in years, they had taken control of their own neighborhood, and the realization was sinking in. Franklin stood beside me, rubbing his wrist where the handcuffs had been not long ago. The red marks were fading, but the anger in his eyes hadn't. Denise and Robert were already discussing the next steps, who would step in as interim leadership, how to audit the HOA's remaining finances, and what legal actions could be taken against Eleanor for the misappropriations. I gestured for everyone's attention. The room quieted as dozens of faces turned toward me waiting. This is a turning point, I said. But it's not the end. Eleanor didn't operate alone, and she's not going to just disappear. If she's been skimming funds, there's a paper trail, and I intend to find it. We need to make sure the HOA is fully accountable from now on. A man near the back, someone I hadn't heard speak before, raised his hand. He was in his 40s, dressed in a worn work shirt, and had the look of someone who had spent years biting his tongue. She still owns a house here, he pointed out. Even if she's out as president, she's still got influence. What if she starts pulling strings from the sidelines? It was a valid concern. Eleanor wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Robert spoke up. Then we make sure she doesn't have any leverage. We go through every financial document, every decision she made. If we find something illegal, we press charges. If she retaliates, we document it. She's not in charge anymore, and we make sure she never is again. Denise nodded. And we fix the HOA from the ground up. No more secret meetings. No more intimidation. We take back every ounce of power she stole from us. A ripple of agreement moved through the room. Franklin crossed his arms, his expression dark. We also need to make sure she doesn't try to retaliate against individual homeowners. She's vindictive. She'll look for ways to make life miserable for the people who stood against her. I had already been thinking about that. Eleanor had lost her official position, but people like her didn't just give up. I'll make sure the sheriff's office is aware, I said. If she tries anything, I want reports filed immediately. No one here should feel unsafe in their own home. The meeting continued late into the evening as plans were made. A temporary board was established, with Denise and Robert stepping up to help oversee the transition. Volunteers agreed to go through the HOA's records, and homeowners began sharing their own files, letters, fines, and old complaints they had been too afraid to challenge before. By the time Franklin and I left the clubhouse, the night air was cool and thick with the scent of freshly cut grass. The streetlights cast long shadows over the pavement, and most of the neighborhood was quiet. As we walked toward his house, Franklin exhaled, his shoulders finally relaxing. That was the first time in a long time I felt like we actually had control, he admitted. I clapped him on the back. Because you do. Eleanor's been ruling through fear. Now that people know they can fight back, she's lost her strongest weapon. Franklin unlocked his front door, and we stepped inside. The place was still a little bare. He had kept things simple since moving in. Never sure how long he'd stay with Eleanor, making his life hell. But now, for the first time, it felt like a place he could finally settle into. I was about to say something when my phone buzzed. A message from Sheriff Martinez. We need to talk. Something came up in the financial records I pulled. Call me when you can. I frowned and showed Franklin the message. He read it, his expression turning serious. Call him now, he said. I did. Martinez picked up on the first ring. I found something, he said immediately. Eleanor wasn't just misappropriating funds, she was laundering money through the HOA. I paced the living room, my mind working fast. Explain. She created fake vendor contracts, Martinez continued. Money was being allocated for services that were never actually performed: landscaping, maintenance, legal expenses. But the payments were going to shell companies. I exhaled sharply. And whose names are on those companies? Martinez hesitated. 2 are linked to her, but there's another name that concerns me. Ronald Grayson. Franklin stiffened. Her husband. I nodded grimly. I thought they were divorced. They are, Martinez confirmed. But that doesn't mean they stopped working together. If he set up the accounts, she could funnel money through them without raising suspicion. I ran a hand through my hair. This was bigger than just HOA corruption. This was fraud and financial crime on a completely different level. We need to bring this to the state attorney, I said. This isn't just an internal HOA issue anymore. Martinez agreed. I'll start the paperwork, but I need you to keep an eye on things. If Eleanor realizes we're onto this, she might try to destroy evidence. Franklin clenched his jaw. Or she might try to disappear. I wasn't going to let either happen. After I ended the call, Franklin shook his head. She's been running this scam for years, hasn't she? I nodded. And now we have the proof to end it. The next morning, I met with the new HOA leadership team. Denise and Robert were already hard at work reviewing records, and when I told them about Eleanor's financial scheme, their reactions were a mix of anger and grim satisfaction. We always knew she was crooked, Robert said. But this? This is prison-level corruption. Denise looked toward a stack of old HOA financial reports. How do we make sure she doesn't get away with it? I pulled out my phone. We go public. That afternoon, I arranged a press conference. Local reporters arrived, eager to cover the downfall of a corrupt HOA president. I stood at the podium outside the county office and laid out the facts. Eleanor Grayson had abused her position, extorted homeowners, and laundered money. By the evening news cycle, her face was plastered across every television in the county. Eleanor had spent years controlling the narrative. Now she couldn't hide from it. And as I watched the broadcast from Franklin's living room, I knew this was only the beginning of her reckoning. The morning after the press conference, the fallout from Eleanor's exposure was already in full swing. News stations had picked up the story, turning it into a countywide scandal. The details of her financial crimes, the fraudulent vendor contracts, and the sham elections had turned her from a feared HOA tyrant into a public disgrace. I had barely stepped into my office when Sheriff Martinez called. Eleanor's panicking, he said. She lawyered up last night, but her attorney's already trying to negotiate. She knows the state attorney's office is coming for her. I leaned back in my chair, considering. Eleanor had spent years manipulating people, but now she was cornered in a way she couldn't talk her way out of. I had expected her to put up more of a fight, but even she must have realized that the evidence against her was overwhelming. What's she offering? I asked. Nothing solid yet, Martinez said. But I think she's looking for a way out that doesn't involve jail time. Problem is, with the amount of money she moved through those fake contracts, that's not going to happen. I knew Eleanor well enough to know she wasn't the type to take full responsibility for her actions. She would try to shift the blame, claim ignorance, or throw someone else under the bus if it meant saving herself. That's what I needed to watch for. Keep the pressure on her, I said. The second she realizes she can't negotiate her way out of this, she's going to try something desperate. I had barely ended the call when Franklin walked in, looking more rested than he had in days. He dropped a file onto my desk. You're going to want to see this, he said. I opened it and skimmed the contents. More financial records, but these weren't just the ones Martinez had pulled. These were internal HOA documents, ones that should have been buried under Eleanor's control. Where did you get these? I asked. Denise and Robert, Franklin said. They went through old meeting minutes and found that Eleanor had been backdating approvals for expenses that were never actually voted on. She was manufacturing consent after the fact. I flipped through the pages. Eleanor had been methodical, making it look like the neighborhood had agreed to these charges when, in reality, no one had ever even seen them. This means every financial decision she made under those fake approvals is null, I said. That means homeowners who were fined under her fabricated rules have a case for refunds. Franklin nodded. And it also means we can hit her with even more fraud charges. I closed the folder and stood. Let's take this to the state attorney. If Eleanor thought she had a way out before, she won't after they see this. By the time we arrived at the courthouse, the legal machine was already in motion. The state attorney had formally opened a case and subpoenas were being issued for Eleanor's bank records, her emails, and every HOA document she had ever touched. Martinez met us outside. She knows she's going down, he said. Her lawyer just called again, trying to work out a deal. I wasn't interested in deals. Eleanor had spent years ruining people's lives and she deserved every consequence coming her way. I want her to pay back everything she stole, I said. Every homeowner who was forced to pay illegal fines, every cent she funneled into those fake contracts. She doesn't just walk away from this. Martinez gave a dry chuckle. She won't. She's looking at serious time. Especially now that we know her ex-husband was involved. I raised an eyebrow. What about him? He tried to withdraw a large sum from one of the shell companies last night, Martinez said. Bank flagged it, and now we're looking into whether he was actively helping her hide money. Eleanor's world was crumbling faster than even I had expected. If her ex-husband turned on her to save himself, it would be over even sooner. I turned to Franklin. We should get back to the neighborhood. People are going to have questions about what happens next. When we arrived, the clubhouse was packed. Homeowners were gathered, some talking in hushed voices, others openly celebrating. Denise stood at the front, going over paperwork with Robert. The second we walked in, people turned, eager for answers. Denise looked relieved to see us. "Tell me you have good news." I gave a nod. "Eleanor's about to be buried under legal trouble. She won't be coming back from this." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Robert crossed his arms. "What about the money she took?" I held up the folder Franklin had given me earlier. "We found proof that all of those fines and fees she imposed were fraudulent. That means you can all fight for reimbursement." The room erupted into discussion. Some people were shocked, others furious that they had been paying into a corrupt system for so long. Franklin stepped forward. "And more than that, we're making sure this HOA never falls into the hands of someone like Eleanor again. That means fair elections, open meetings, and full transparency." Denise nodded. "We're already working on a plan to restructure everything. No more secret rules. No more intimidation." The atmosphere in the room shifted. For the first time, people weren't just reacting to Eleanor's downfall, they were thinking about what came next. By the time the meeting ended, the neighborhood had a clear path forward. Committees were formed to oversee different aspects of the transition, and volunteers stepped up to help review remaining records. As Franklin and I walked back to his house, he let out a long breath. "I can't believe it's finally over," he said. I glanced at him. "Not just over. Fixed. The neighborhood is stronger now because of it." He nodded. "And Eleanor? She'll spend the next few years learning what it's like to live under rules she can't manipulate," I said. "Prison ones." Franklin smiled for the first time in days. "Good." As I looked around the neighborhood, I saw people talking, laughing, finally free from the grip of a tyrant. Eleanor had built her empire on fear, but in the end, it had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. And the people she had tried to control, they had won.